I recently listened to an interview which was done by my buddy Gio on his own channel, Gio on the Go, with a guy that I believe his name was Steve, who recently moved from Thailand to the Philippines. And so Gio asked him for his impressions comparing the two. I'll give you a link here in the description so that you can check it out, also in the pinned comment. Now, much of what Steve shared about Thailand was very, very similar to my experience 1 year living in Vietnam. The great food, the lower cost of living compared to even the Philippines. I did a budget video a long time ago, back in 2019, and using Excel, I compared my two budgets. And for me to live in Vietnam was easily 30% less than living in the Philippines. So there were a lot of similarities with the good food, the great infrastructure. If you've been an expat for any amount of time, you will realize that living in a country that has a decent infrastructure will matter to you at some point, especially if you've come from a Western country where there's real sidewalks, street signs, street lights, the electricity stays on. In fact, the lack of these things, or just the infrequency of it, is enough to drive enough guys crazy that they'll leave within the first year and discontinue being an expat. The food in Thailand, Vietnam is very healthy. The streets are maintained and clean. And while I know it's sort of subjective to say, well, the people were really great, I can honestly say that after living in Vietnam in 2019, the people that I would just see walking by on the sidewalk in my neighborhood, they were very friendly. The only word I really knew was Xin Chao, just to say hello. And they would go Xin Chao, and they would smile and wave, and they'd be out there sweeping the sidewalk and stuff. Now, of course, everybody has their horror stories, things that go south in Thailand, Mexico, United States, you name it. But in general, I found Vietnam to be very friendly. So this caused me, after listening to the interview that Gio did with Steve, it caused me to think, well, okay, so you've got Vietnam and Thailand, which are definitely cheaper to live in than the Philippines. And not just cheaper, but you get a higher quality lodging and internet experience than you would for the same amount of money in the Philippines. He gave the example of what $300 gets you in Thailand, which is pretty nice, even a one-bedroom studio. Whereas a $300 rental apartment in the Philippines is going to be pretty basic. You're not going to be getting new appliances. The plumbing might be a little wonky. It's just not going to be the same standard. So then I got to thinking, and I'm thinking, well, okay, then all things considered, it would seem like the no-brainer is to live in Vietnam or live in Thailand for the better infrastructure, the lower cost of living, the healthier food, even the healthier street food, which when you compare those with the Philippines, again, there's going to be much that's left to be desired. I'll just put it that way. So, of course, this begs the question, why would a person decide on the Philippines over a place like Vietnam or Thailand? Now, I myself have been living in the Philippines since 2012. So for 13 plus years now, I've been very happy, very content. And as best I know, I intend to live the rest of my life in the Philippines. They say never, but all things considered, I think this is where I'll probably spend the rest of my life. But why? Considering that Thailand and Vietnam are cheaper and nicer. And for me, and this is what I want to share, the contrast. For me, there are some valid points about the Philippines which sway me to staying in the Philippines. Again, if things were to change, if there was some kind of big political unrest or huge inflation or something like that, again, I would have to reevaluate things and relocate if necessary. So the first thing I'll bring up is the issue of the language barrier. Yes, in Vietnam, I found some people who did speak English, and I'm sure the same can be said in Thailand. But as far as relationships go, the older women were less likely to speak English in Vietnam. I can't say for Thailand. Maybe those of you who have spent a lot of time there, you can mention that in the comments. But in Vietnam, the women that were generally 30 and older were far more available for a relationship with a foreigner, but these were the women that had not gone to college and did not speak, in some cases, any English. And in other cases, spoke very minimal English. I would say, put it at, say, 25 to 30% proficiency, which is not very good, especially if you're really trying to have some, meaningful conversation. I had several instances in Vietnam where I checked out the dating sites because approaching women in public, I tried that for a while. That works fantastic in the Philippines because they speak English. But when I tried that in Vietnam, I remember one time in particular, I came out of the grocery store and there was this beautiful Vietnamese woman. She was a security guard there in the mall. So and this was like, keep in mind, this was like my first 2 weeks in Vietnam, and I'm still like getting my bearings. So I walked up to this just gorgeous woman and I said, "Excuse me, can you tell me how late the mall is open? And does the grocery store open earlier than the mall?" And she just looked at me like I was some kind of Martian, not in a bad way. She had like literally zero understanding of what I was trying to tell her, to the same degree that when I would overhear Vietnamese people talking, I have no idea what they're saying. So the language barrier, again, it's very novel. I enjoyed it. I loved being immersed in a country where I didn't know the language. And I had high hopes that within 1 year, I could at least learn a few phrases. But aside from Xing Chao, Cafe, Pha Ba, Pha Ga, Pha Ka, by the way, the words in Vietnam are spoken usually as a one-syllable word. So your inflection, and I'm sure I murdered the words I just gave you, the inflection of the vowel changes the definition or maybe makes it into nonsense if you don't pronounce the vowel, if you don't inflect it. And that's not something you can pick up on paper. You have to actually hear it, have somebody teach it to you. And even then, I had one college student that I was dating for a while, for 5 weeks, and she tried to teach me. We'd sit there on the bed and she'd write it out and she'd pronounce it. And it was like a comedy routine. She would say, "Here it is, D-A-I, die." And I would say, "Die." She goes, "No, not die, die." I'm like, "That's what I said." She's like, "No, you didn't." So the language barrier, I enjoyed sort of that immersion, being the one person that's not Vietnamese in a crowd of 500 people. I like that personally. And I don't find it isolating at all. I love my alone time. And being in that environment for me is comforting because I know nobody's going to walk up in English and interrupt my thoughts. So for me, I loved the fact that there was a language barrier. But most people are not like that. And many of the expats that I've spoken with that have spent time in either Thailand or Vietnam, that was one of their complaints, was it's awesome, but I'm really struggling to build a relationship. Now, if it's just some sort of superficial, quickie kind of thing, yeah, you can always work that out with just Google Translate. But if you're actually trying to find a wife or a long-term serious girlfriend, being able to speak the same language matters a lot. So that's one reason that I find myself very comfortable in the Philippines. I'm married now, been with my wife now coming up on 6 years. So even though I'm not out dating, I know that when I go to the grocery store, I can go to any clerk in there and say, "Well, excuse me, do you know where the mayonnaise is?" I don't eat mayonnaise, but you know what I'm saying. The other day, I was riding my motorbike and I got a flat tire. So I pulled over quickly and I just happened to pull over in front of a tire shop. Now, there was no language barrier. I was able to just talk to the guy and say, "Hey, my tire went flat. Any chance you could fix it? How much would that be?" We went through the whole transactional conversation. In fact, he had it ready in about 15 minutes and he only charged me the equivalent of $3. It just happened to be a broken valve stem. But you see what I mean? The language issue can become kind of the last straw for a lot of guys after they've been a long period in Vietnam or Thailand. Now, I know what you're thinking. You might be saying, oh, well, just learn the local language. It's respectful and functional, and I agree with you. But raise your hand if after a year you can have good conversation in Thai or Vietnamese. My hat's off to you, because it's not an easy thing. I learned Spanish in 3 months. Spanish is a very simple language. Learning another language, all languages are not equal. I knew a guy years ago, he spent 2 years learning Russian so he could move to Russia. In the 2 years that I knew him, he was still struggling. Now, languages like Spanish, Italian, French, well, okay, French, I'll say that's got a bit of inflection to it, but you can learn some languages pretty darn easy because there are literally less grammatical rules or less of a reliance on the tone. But when you get to Vietnamese and Thai, like I said, my hat's off to you if you can be conversational in 1 year. Now, the other thing that would cause me to choose the Philippines over, say, Thailand or Vietnam is the visa situation. And even the guy Steve mentioned twice that you've got a few different ways you can go at it in Thailand. You can try the tourist approach, which is going to wear out fast in Thailand. They really don't want tourists who just keep returning. I know that sounds weird, but they don't want tourists to keep returning and renewing tourist visas for years on end. They don't like it. But they do have other visas where you can take, say, for instance, a Thai cooking class or a class to learn to speak Thai, or you can take a Muay Thai class, and that will help in your renewal of your Thai visa. But you still, in Vietnam and Thailand, you're often looking at an uncertain renewal issue. So imagine yourself, your intention is to live the next 5 years in Thailand. So you go to Thailand, you get a lease for 6 months or a year, and you start buying stuff. Maybe you get a furniture, this or that, your favorite recliner for your desk or whatever. And then at some point, you got to leave the country to renew your visa, and then you get denied. Well, there's all your stuff in that apartment that you bought, and you can't get to it. And some of that stuff might be your personal items. So you may do okay renewing your visa for 1 or 2 years. But if your goal is 5 years or more, your best bet is going to be to spend the money to get an attorney to kind of help you work through the system. And you may have to do a deposit, maybe not, but the visa uncertainty with Thailand, and then when it comes to Vietnam, they're a little easier to work with. In fact, I believe they're starting to bring back the 1-year visa. You still have to leave the country every 3 months, but at least you know they're going to let you back in. But you can see how not knowing if you're going to get that visa renewal means you're going to have to keep your footprint light and think to yourself, okay, I might have issues getting back in. I might have to apply for a different visa, and I won't be able to get to my stuff if I leave it in country. And again, I say that applies more to Thailand than it does to Vietnam. Whereas in the Philippines, you can come in as a tourist, renew every 2 months, and stay for up to 3 years consecutively. And after that 3 years, you leave the Philippines, take a little 5-day trip in Vietnam or something, come back and repeat the process. So when it comes to visa assurance, that you're going to get that visa, Philippines really can't be beat. And it is a good peace of mind. And they don't require you to leave every 3 months like Vietnam and Thailand do. You can just continually stay in the Philippines, just nonstop for 36 months consecutive. So you've got the language, you got the visa situation, comparison between Vietnam, Thailand, and Philippines. Those are the positive reasons that keep me thinking I will just spend the rest of my life in the Philippines. Again, everybody's different. Everybody has different priorities. I'm just sharing with you what keeps me in the Philippines. Now, one other element, which may not apply to you, is that my wife made it clear from the very beginning when we started dating that if we were to stay together, she had zero interest in living outside the Philippines. She did not want to live in America, did not want to live in Vietnam, did not want to live in Thailand. She didn't want to live anywhere outside the Philippines. She knows the Philippines. She speaks the language. She knows how things work here. So if we had any problems, she knew that she could contribute and help me navigate through that. Now, I'm pretty savvy myself after 13 years here, but together we know that if something came our way in the Philippines that was kind of wonky to deal with, we're both familiar with, again, the culture and the laws and just how things work here. Whereas in Vietnam or Thailand, if something goes south legally or whatever, we're kind of a fish out of water. Neither one of us really knows much. Which leads me to another thing. And again, not everybody is looking for a long-term marriage or relationship or anything. In my case, we're married and we want to build a future. That means buying a home. We couldn't do that as two foreigners living in Thailand or living in Vietnam. Now, before I met my wife and I was living in Vietnam, I just kind of figured, well, if I stay long enough, I'll eventually meet the right Vietnamese woman who speaks English, is attractive, we get along great and all this. And if we got married, well, then that's kind of smooths out the path for not only my visa, but the ability to buy land. But if my Filipino wife and I, again, live in either of those two countries, neither one of us is qualified to own land. Whereas in the Philippines, she can. I can pay for it. She will own it. And I'm totally fine with that. I've had plenty of houses in my life. I really don't need another one. But it would be great as a security for her so that in the future, she doesn't have to worry about mortgage or rent or where she's going to live or somebody kicking her out. She has her own home. Now, the other negative that I mentioned at the beginning is that Philippines infrastructure really just, if anyone is going to be honest, Philippines infrastructure cannot compare to that of Vietnam or Thailand. And lately, buddies of mine, I've been in Cambodia before, and buddies of mine that have been there more recently, even Cambodia is starting to come up to snuff. So what do I mean when I say the Philippines infrastructure could use some work? Well, basically, there is an efficient way to do things and then the non-efficient way of doing things. And in the Philippines, in order to do things efficiently, you need money to do that. You need money for street signs. You need money to buy signs that go in the street that say, hey, there's a big hole in the street. In the Philippines, if there's construction going on for a few days and they dug an 8-foot hole in the road, the only warning you're going to get is that maybe they stuck some bushes out there and tied a rag on it. I've even seen one time where an office chair was put out in the road with some branches around it. That was your warning, which you can only see in the daytime because bushes are not that reflective at night. But that's your only warning that, hey, there's a hole right here. It takes money for businesses to be motivated to provide napkins. In the Philippines, they'll give you maybe 2 or 4 complementary tissues, which are pretty much useless the first time you use them. They just tear, they're thin. It's a lot of little things that money could fix. Like when you go to the bathroom in the malls in the Philippines, just don't expect to find toilet paper there. It's not going to be there. If you're lucky, there will be a bidet. And if you're even luckier, it'll work. Same thing with hand towels, paper towels in the bathroom. They're just not going to be there. Now, sometimes there will be one of those hand blow dryers. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they just kind of barely blow out a little bit of a breeze and it's pretty much useless. I mean, I could literally spend the next 2 hours describing how lack of infrastructure will add friction to just doing daily things. Whereas in Vietnam and Thailand, you're not going to have that so much, that problem. You're not going to be in the middle of dinner and then the power goes out for like the 4th time that month. So you can see how not having a great infrastructure, it can drive some guys crazy. And they just, like I said, they just end up saying, screw it, throw their stuff in a suitcase, they leave and they never come back. Now myself, I have learned two things. One, you have to accept the situation for what it is. Think of it as glorified camping. If you've got a nice apartment with great air conditioning and the power goes out twice a month, count yourself fortunate. You have electricity the other 28 days. Same thing with the water. And when you're out driving around, you have got to be alert, especially driving at night, because that 8-foot hole, you may not see it. Don't overdrive the length of your headlight. You have to learn to expect that you are probably the only person on the road around you who actually went to a driver's education class and knows the proper rules of the road. When you're going around a blind turn, expect you might see a cement truck passing some other car coming right at you. You have got to be alert. And if you don't have these kind of skills, you may not last long. So why would I choose to live in an atmosphere of what I call weirdness, just wonkiness, lack of infrastructure, lack of efficiency? Why would I do that? Because, and this is the main crucial point that I will conclude with, you can have an awesome life in the Philippines. I am living proof of it. I have been having a fantastic time since I got off the plane July 11th, 2012. It has been an adventure. I have met just so many people, both expats and Filipinas. I have so many places I've been to, beautiful places, strange places, sad kind of places. Moving to the Philippines has been, again, just the greatest, most positive adventure I have had in my entire life. And I'm 62 years old right now. But I have come to this conclusion after speaking with many, many, many expats who came here and just could not hack it after 6 months or a year. And it's this. You have two choices if you're going to live in the Philippines long term, as in maybe the rest of your life. You have two choices, and it's based on how much money you have. Your first choice is if you don't have much money, as in you don't have more than, say, $1,500 US a month to throw at your budget, plus money in savings for medical expenses, medical expat health insurance if you want to do that. If you don't have sufficient money and you're telling yourself, well, I'm just going to make it work on $900 a month, $1,100 a month, and you're going to try to raise an entire family and all this, you have to accept the fact that you will need to compromise on your standard of living. Because unless you marry a wealthy Filipina and you just move into their huge compound and they build you a house, unless you get that kind of dream scenario, which, by the way, don't really waste too much time looking for that. What you're really looking at is building, if you can, maybe a small house that kind of does the job. It's nothing fancy. There's no air con because that's too expensive to pay the electricity for. The kitchen's kind of wonky and sometimes the chickens get in the house. You're going to have to make compromises to live like a local. Maybe not in a nipa hut with no running water. I'm not saying that. But the apartment you get, or the home that maybe you scrape enough money together to build a small little place on a small piece of land surrounded by Filipinos in the province, you're going to have to adjust your life expectations on your standard of living. That is just unavoidable. If you're here in the Philippines long term on a small budget, you will have to make sacrifices and get used to it because it's not going to change. It's not going to get any better. Learn to enjoy Filipino food. Learn to get by without aircon and just have an oscillating fan in each room. Learn to live in an area where you may have some very noisy neighbors. You're just going to have to get used to it. Now, that's one choice. The other choice, the other option, if you can afford it, is to have a very healthy budget. And I'm talking at least $1,700 US dollars for a single guy, $2,000 would be better for yourself and a Filipino wife, maybe $2,300 a month if you're going to have some kids and you want to have a house and you're going to send the kids to school in uniforms and pay for their field trips, yada, 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 yada. Plus health insurance for the whole family. If you have the money, $2,000 or more, $3,000 a month, $4,000 a month, $5,000 a month, you can use that money in a country that lacks infrastructure, and you can build what I often call the bubble of bliss. Now, I usually talk about the bubble of bliss as a mental state, not letting your environment harass your inner peace. But in this case, where we're talking about the pragmatics of your standard of living, if you've got the money, you can have a nice house in a nice neighborhood. You can have a nice car and a nice motorcycle. You can eat at nice restaurants. You can go to great resorts. You can take vacations at the best places in the Philippines. You can have an awesome life if you have the money to insulate yourself from the lack of infrastructure. You essentially go to places that understand if we want to earn the big money from the quote unquote rich foreigners, we need to give them a pleasant experience. And that's what you get at nice resorts, nice condominium places, nice gated communities. Not all the time. Again, there's exceptions. There's some gated communities people have told me they had the worst experience. The houses and everything looked great, and then it turned out the plumbing was very shoddy. So do your due diligence. But those are the two choices if you plan on living long-term in the Philippines. Now, if language is not an issue for you, go to Vietnam or Thailand. If you absolutely have to live in a country where the infrastructure is good and things work the way they're supposed to, live in Vietnam or Thailand or Malaysia. And if you can afford it, Singapore. Even Cambodia is a consideration. But don't think that you're going to be happy in the Philippines if infrastructure really means a lot to you and you don't have the money to insulate and get a better quality life. Now, on the other hand, if you're flexible, if you're able to adjust to the weirdness, not go through a whole lot of inner stress, telling yourself, oh, it should be this way. And in my country, we do it that way. And, you know, if you can just shut down all that inner mental nonsense that will literally drive you crazy, if you can do that and you can either adjust to a lower standard of living in the Philippines, or you have the money to live a great lifestyle in the Philippines, well, then you can enjoy the benefit of the fact that English is spoken. You can have conversations, you can build friendships, you can build relationships because you're all speaking the same language. And you don't have to worry that, well, am I going to get my visa next month? And oh, guy, I gotta leave the country. My 3 months are due, and I got to take all my stuff with me in case they don't let me back, or I have to get a different type of visa. You don't have that stress in the Philippines. So, as I have said for the last 13 years, there is no cookie cutter way to be an expat. There is no one answer that will solve it for this guy versus that guy, or for you, because every guy has his own set of priorities of what is most important. And my only goal here is to just put all this in front of you so that you can look at it and say, well, you know, for me, this is most important. I will not negotiate on this. I must have X, Y, and Z. So I hope you found that helpful and love to hear your thoughts there in the comments.